close this one, is that right? Okay. All right. Oh, I see. Okay, I just hit mine. All right, thank you. All right. I'm David Kreutzer from the Heritage Foundation. I'm an economist, and I was going to tell a joke, but Ross, you're an economist or are you math? Okay, it doesn't apply to him, but the definition of an economist is somebody who's good with numbers but doesn't have the charisma to be an accountant. And I'm going to try to overcome that today, but I'm not sure I will. I'm going to be talking about the economic impacts of cap and trade. In particular, the numbers that I will be talking about will be results of analysis we did at the Heritage Foundation of the Lieberman-Warner bill, which was soundly defeated last summer, but more and worse legislation is on the way. So these numbers that I'm going to show you today are actually not as bad as the ones we will get if any of the legislation currently proposed gets enacted. And the president is pushing for a much stronger reduction than Lieberman-Warner. Lieberman-Warner was going to cut CO2 by 70% by 2050. Our analysis only goes up to 2030. Okay, so I said, what would 70% less mean? Actually, I should say, what would 30% less mean? Because the numbers I'm showing you are only up to 2030, when CO2 will be cut by about 30%. All right. Well, what would it mean? Means, okay, I'm going to give you the numbers here. I'm going to explain them later. 5 trillion, 3 million, 800,000, and 600. All right. You don't have to memorize those. We'll come back to them. I put this up because I was afraid somebody may have come to a climate conference expecting to hear Al Gore talking about 20 feet of water in Manhattan, and so this will calm them down. Plus, it's a photo from Apollo 17, which was Harrison Schmitt's Apollo mission. How does cap and trade work? Well, they're talking about cap and trade, and people realize, hey, wait a minute, that's a tax. So they changed it to, well, cap and invest, or cap and dividend. But they don't want to talk about carbon tax, which is what this is. All right. If somebody comes up and puts a gun to your head and says, for every ton of CO2 you emit, you have to give me $100, that's a carbon tax. If they put a gun to your head and said, for every ton of CO2 you emit, you have to give him $100, that's cap and trade. Okay? The government will put a reducing maximum cap on the amount of CO2 that can be emitted each year. How do you get these permits? Well, it depends how the government issues them. They're called allowances. Okay. If they auction off 100%, then somebody has to go and you have to buy them each year. You can save them for later years, and under some proposals, you can borrow against the future with a significant interest rate. But in any event, in order to emit the CO2, and this is regulated at the refineries for petroleum products, at the distributor level for natural gas, and at the user level for coal, which is primarily the electric power generation. All right. We know pretty well how much CO2 is emitted for each unit of those fuels. So in order to use those fuels, you have to buy the permits either at auction or for somebody who got them at auction or from somebody or entity that was given these permits. All right. So that's the mechanism. It adds a huge price, an increasing price to energy. 85% of America's energy comes from fossil fuels. We don't have the technology to replace that energy with alternatives yet. Maybe by 2100 we will have. Who knows? We might have invented magic by 2100. We don't know. But in the next 20 years, we're not going to have it. Okay. So what happens? Well, we looked at it. I put this up just to show you that, in fact, I do not have the charisma of an accountant. These are the diagrams we bored you with in your econ classes. And so I meant to say before I started, this is usually when I go to these sessions, this is about where I start to fall asleep. So that's all right. I won't call you out unless you snore loudly. I just want to show you, we used a model developed by smarter economists than I am. And they have lots of equations. I'm not going to try to convince anybody, but certainly nobody here, that complicated computer models are always accurate. But what I want to try to give you a feel for is the sorts of adjustments that we take into account when we look at cap and trade. When we restrict CO2, it drives up energy prices. So the price of electricity goes up. How do consumers respond? We know they buy less electricity. But they don't buy enough less that they aren't spending more on it. So they're going to spend more on electricity, they have less to spend on other things. Well, there are equations in there that adjust that. We know that when energy prices become more expensive, people economize. They buy smaller cars. They drive less. They take the bus more. That's in the econometric model. We've made those estimates over decades. We have estimates of how people respond to these changes. Are there green jobs in there? Yes, there are green jobs in the model. When energy prices go up, people replace heating and cooling equipment sooner to get the more efficient ones. They buy appliances more quickly to replace the older, less efficient ones. So the green jobs are all built in here, but what do we get? Okay. Well, the overall impact on the economy is terrible, right? We see these numbers. These are losses in GDP by year from now until 2030 or 2029. I can't remember which one of my charts I have. And you see it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, rises to over 400 billion. This is not the transfer. This is not the tax revenue. This is this pie getting smaller. All right? The pie gets smaller in 2030 by $400 billion. When you add those all up, just in those 20 years, you get the $5 trillion I was talking about. And these are adjusted for inflation. None of this is due to inflation. This is what we call in economics deadweight loss. And as an aside, I don't have a slide for it, but the transfer is of a comparable magnitude. So the tax that we take from energy consumers and give to whoever's privileged enough to receive it is equal to this deadweight loss, a very inefficient way of raising money, by the way. Okay. Now, as another aside to an aside, the recent Obama budget had in it a line about the revenues from his cap and trade bill that he hadn't quite enacted yet, but we're counting on the revenues. If you read the footnote, and this is Washington at its worst, all right, to really understand it, you have to go to this huge budget, you have to find the line item, and then you have to read the footnote. The footnote points out that the $645 billion in tax revenue, allowance revenue they're talking about, is really only the portion that they've already designated for make work pay and for efficient energy technology research. That's $645 billion. Our analysis of a much less stringent drawdown and less lucrative drawdown shows that that will be at least $1.6 trillion. So they've got a mom and apple pie expenditure covering for this huge tax and spend bill. They say $645 billion, they're off by only $1 trillion, and they know it. Okay, so get back to this talk. Economy takes a huge hit, the pie gets smaller, and up from that smaller pie, a huge amount is transferred. 5 trillion lost GDP. Now, not all sectors are hit equally hard. The energy-intensive sectors are going to be hit harder than the less energy-intensive sectors. That's probably don't need to explain that. Manufacturing in particular is hard hit. What happens in manufacturing? They lose 3 million jobs by 2029. All right, we see the dark bars are the losses that manufacturing we expect to lose because increasing productivity. Just the way the economy is evolving over years, the whole world, by the way, has been losing manufacturing jobs because it doesn't take as many people to produce the same amount of stuff, so we can produce more stuff, actually, with fewer manufacturing workers. And that's, we can argue about whether that's good or bad. I don't think that's a bad thing. What is a bad thing is to make it faster than the markets would dictate. And we see by 2029, normal economic operation, 1 million fewer manufacturing jobs, all right, with a Lieberman-Warner type drawdown, which at that point is only 30% less CO2, not the 70% or the 80% or the 85 or the 95. We have an additional 3 million manufacturing jobs, nearly 3 million. So 5 trillion lost GDP. In the manufacturing sector, they're going to lose 3 million jobs. And not all parts of the country have the same manufacturing intensity. The darker the color here, the higher the relative manufacturing intensity. So these jobs aren't going to be lost on it evenly either. Now, not too surprisingly, if we do this by congressional district, we find among the very lowest, the ones least dependent on manufacturing, would be Waxman's district in Hollywood and Pelosi's district in San Francisco. Now, the manufacturing jobs are not all lost because we ship them overseas. There will be some of that. Ironically, we would make ourselves worse off if we tried to stop that. A different discussion. But what happens is that we shift from manufacturing to service. How does that work? Well, here, you can have a washing machine to clean your clothes, or you can have somebody wash them for you. You get the clean clothes. One is energy intensive, manufacturing intensive, the washing machine. The other is labor intensive, which the Greens seem to like. She's kind of looking at the washing machine. I'm sure she is envious of it. By the way, I want to thank the Met Museum online. They allow me to use this image so long as I mention their website and that this is The Washerwoman by Jean-Simeon Chardin. I hope my French is okay. I did take 7 years of French 1. Now, after the people move over to being washerwomen and whatever else it is they do, all right, there's still not enough adjustment. That is, we lose 3 million manufacturing jobs. A lot of them will go over to the service sector, but we see the net impact. We still have the economy in disequilibrium by about, in some years, you can see, over 800,000 jobs. So the net impact, even after the green jobs, even after people switch over to the service sector, we have, for most of the years in our analysis, it's over 400,000 fewer jobs, and in a couple years, over 800,000. So this is, as has been mentioned, an anti-stimulus bill, okay? It is not good. So overall jobs lost, 800,000. $5 trillion lost GDP, 3 million lost manufacturing jobs, 800,000 jobs overall, all right? Now, some people would argue, on the green side, well, we're having this stimulus. We need these green jobs because they're going to stimulate the economy. It's very popular, by the way. I have lots of liberal relatives that are trying to tell me this. You know, that when we restrict CO2, okay, that people will be inventive, which they will be, and they will create more jobs that are lost, which they won't. Certainly they won't create more income. Here's a green job. I hope I have my slides in order. I left my printout somewhere else. All right, I found a green job from 1945 in Mechanics Illustrated. Okay, and I've been told by the media people, don't read your slide, but I have to read this one. Leg power replaces electricity in this Parisian beauty salon where Madame has her hair dried, despite, and here's the Back to the Future part, despite the lack of coal-generated current. All right, that's where we're going. An ingenious beautician hires unemployed 6-day bicycle racers to pedal away on a bike, the back wheel of which is attached to a small generator. All right. We're going to have the two important things you need for this green job. No coal-generated electricity and unemployment. We're going to get both of those. Okay. Now, that's an old one. Apparently, we have better ones now, so I love Google, even though the Sergey Brin seems to think green is great in spite of his rocket ship rides, but I love Google anyway. So I found this modern version, okay? Now this is the racer model there we go, that's a more casual one if you want to generate electricity, leaning back. At this website, the guy says this is great. He does it mainly for exercise. I hope he's not trying to push us to the green economy by generating our own electricity, though he brags about how he runs his cell phone off of the battery that he charges. But he said when he was in shape on this machine, he could generate 150 watts averaged over a half hour. There you go. I see we have some people that know their units. To run just a handheld hairdryer, I don't know how that guy, that bicycle racer, he must have been in phenomenal shape. I don't think he could have been running the resistors. He couldn't have been running the heating elements in those hairdryers. Because your handheld hairdryer on medium uses 900 watts. So if this guy can do 150 watts for a half hour, you need 6 of him, all right, to run one handheld hairdryer. Now, if we know something about retail prices of electricity in the United States are about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. This is a little bit less than a kilowatt. So for 8 hours, all right, help me get this here. If we had one person, 150 watts, okay, you got about a dime or 15 cents. But we're going to subsidize it because we need these green jobs. Now, that's what's wrong with the green jobs. You take somebody that could be earning $10, $20, $30 an hour, and what does that reflect? That reflects how much they're producing elsewhere in the economy. You say, but we're going to subsidize. We're going to pay him $30 to go ride this generator. We're taking output that's worth $30, converting it to electricity that's worth 15 cents. That's your green stimulus, all right? Now, you can change that wheel into a wind turbine. Maybe it's not quite as bad in terms of ratios, but you don't stimulate the economy by spending $10 to generate $5 worth of electricity. Okay. How much damage is $5 trillion? All right, I'm talking one back. The first thing, so we had $5 trillion worth of damage to the economy. Fortunately, some people, some of them may be here, Roger Pilkey Jr., Chris Lancey, and some others, did a study to look at hurricanes and see how much damage have hurricanes been doing over the decades. Because you hear this story about they're getting more damaging as the world is getting warmer. Well, they're getting more damaging as the world is getting richer, not warmer. Because we're developing the coastline, all right, of the United States has more condominiums, more hotels, more restaurants now than it did 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 40 years ago. So the same hurricanes would do more damage. They found the track of all the hurricanes for the 1900 to 2005. I think I have that number right, 1900, 2005, right? And they have estimates of what the wind speeds were and the track that they followed. So they plotted those hurricane tracks and speeds over top of the real estate map of the United States as it was in 2005. What did they find? Well, for their purposes, they found, no, hurricanes have not been doing more damage. If the hurricane that hit Miami in the 20s had hit in 2005, it would have been the most damaging hurricane of all time. The 30s would have had more hurricane damage than the 90s. So they don't see any trend. But as an offshoot of that study, I was able to calculate what would be the average cost of a hurricane if it hit the United States in 2005. All of those hurricanes, a couple of Katrina-type hurricanes, a whole bunch of much less damaging ones. You take the average of all of them, in 2005 levels of wealth, it was $5 billion, okay? Most of them do much less damage, few do a little bit more. So what happens in terms of economic hurricane damage? What does Lieberman-Warner like? That's the 600. It's actually well over 600. Lieberman-Warner will do damage to the economy equivalent to 600 hurricanes. Normally, we can expect 2 hurricanes to make landfall in the United States, okay? So 1, 2. All right, some of you may have seen this. If I was clever, I would have some sort of animated thing going, but I have to do it manually. With Lieberman-Warner, we get 1, whoops, 2, oh, here we go, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I'm gonna just do a whole bunch of times till you get to 30 per year. So that gives you a different perspective. 600 hurricanes worth of damage is the equivalent of $5 trillion over that period. So, bingo. $5 trillion lost GDP, 3 million lost manufacturing jobs, 800,000 jobs lost overall, 600 hurricanes worth of economic damage, and then the number I didn't give you at the beginning, how much difference will this make to the world temperature? Which is why I might disagree with Ross's proposal here. Even if we have all of the warming that they're projecting, the solution doesn't do anything. So Lieberman-Warner, how much difference will it make in the world temperature? 0.1 to 0.2 degrees, all right? It's like burning our parkas and sweaters because it's getting cold outside. We want to warm up the world. Sorry about that. Those of you that were asleep especially, I apologize. It is reducing our ability to adopt and adapt to whatever is coming, all right, when we kill our economy to make no difference in the temperature. All right, think of burning your sweaters and parkas to warm up the winter. It just doesn't work. Thank you.